so-called Narco-Sub found floating on Australia's doorstep. These boats are usually used to transport huge amounts of drugs from countries like Colombia.
Suddenly, a radar operator saw a faint, low-running contact off the Florida coast and realized it was moving with deliberate control. The alert went out instantly. USCGC Hamilton pushed to maximum speed. USS Delbert D cut across the projected path. An MQ-9 Reaper dropped for thermal lock as analysts warned the craft could be carrying hundreds of millions in cartel cargo. When the Narco-Sub was finally forced to surface, its black box exposed something far more terrifying than drugs. The phantom contact and the call to arms. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the calm routine inside Florida's Coastal Defense Center broke apart. Operators were staring at the radar screens when a tiny, strange mark appeared in the middle of open water. It was small, faint, and moving at only 6 knots. At first, it looked like a glitch as the radar sometimes produced strange dots when birds flew low or when waves reflected wrongly. But this dot felt different. It moved with a steady rhythm, not drifting like debris or echoing like interference. The room became tense as analysts zoomed in and ran the mark through their filters. Nothing made it disappear. Instead, the signal grew cleaner. Someone muttered that the reading looked like a semi-submersible, but the location made no sense. It was sitting 170 miles offshore, far away from normal shipping routes. Within seconds, every officer in the room understood the same thing. This was no glitch. It was a target. The scramble began instantly, and a P-8 Poseidon was ordered to take off without delay. Its sensors were designed to spot submarines and hidden boats, and that night those eyes were needed. As the aircraft climbed into the night sky, its infrared cameras locked onto the dark ocean below. When it reached the strange signal, the crew saw a shape cutting through the waves with a slow, steady push. It had no lights, no markings, and no transponder. It looked like a shadow floating on top of a larger shadow. Back at the command center, the situation reached crisis level. The operation was given a name, Operation Blue Tide. Urgent intercept orders flew out to the destroyer USS Delbert D and the Coast Guard cutter USCGC Hamilton. Both vessels changed course and pushed to full speed, and the officers on board were briefed on the only detail that mattered right then. Intelligence estimated that whatever was inside that semi-submersible could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Losing it would be a massive blow and a major win for the cartel behind it. The pressure rose with each passing minute. Commanders checked the chart and saw that the target was drifting toward a boundary line. They had roughly 40 minutes before it slipped into international waters. Once that happened, rules changed and actions would become far more restricted. The clock was the real enemy in this chase. At the same time, an MQ-9 Reaper drone was launched to gain a higher view with its thermal camera that gave commanders a wider picture of the ocean. At the same time, 4 RHI teams on the Hamilton rushed to prepare their breaching kits. They checked their gear, loaded their tools, and got ready for a risky high-speed interception. These teams would be the ones who would have to jump onto the craft if it surfaced. The Poseidon sent back another report. The target looked like a black hole on the water, absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. It showed no heat on its exterior and moved in a straight, deliberate line, almost like a machine following strict orders. The hunters were closing in. The Poseidon prepared to scan beneath the waves with its advanced sensors, and the truth it found would change the entire mood of the mission. The silent hunt and the decoy game. The P-8 Poseidon moved into position above the target and began the next step of the hunt. The crew released a cluster of sonobuoys, each one designed to listen beneath the waves. As they drifted into the water, the room inside the aircraft grew silent. Everyone waited for the data to return. When it did, the signal was clear. A low, steady 42 Hz vibration rose from the speakers in what sounded like a deep mechanical heartbeat. The analysts knew exactly what it meant. A diesel engine was running underwater at a depth of roughly 62 feet. The mysterious contact was real, alive, and moving with purpose. The Poseidon shifted to infrared scanning, The camera cut through darkness, tracking heat signatures on the ocean surface. What appeared was a 35-foot teardrop-shaped hull, smooth and precise. The structure was coated with a special layer that hid its heat, making it nearly invisible against the cold water. This was not something thrown together in a jungle workshop. This was high-level engineering. But the cartel did not place all their hope in the sub's stealth. Radar from the USS Delbert D Black and the USCGC Hamilton picked up two fast boats running on each side of the sub's path. They darted left and right in sharp zigzags to confuse targeting systems and distract surveillance teams. If anyone tried to lock onto the sub, these boats made it harder by constantly drawing attention toward themselves. The fast boats were not random escorts. They moved like trained shields, pushing themselves between the sub and any possible threat. Their job was simple: keep eyes off the main vessel to protect the payload at all costs. Back at command, satellite imaging was brought up to expand the picture. A new piece of the puzzle appeared immediately. A large cargo ship sat almost motionless about 20 miles away, and its location and behavior raised suspicion. It was likely waiting for a mid-ocean transfer, meaning that the sub was only one part of a larger route. The cartel had built a full supply chain across the sea, similar to a military operation. Then something happened that changed everything. The sub rose slightly and broke the surface just enough to vent its diesel engine. This action was necessary for its internal systems, but it was also its weakest moment. The Reaper drones saw the sudden burst of warm air from the vent, as the heat spike was impossible for the enemy to hide. The drones sent the footage straight to command, marking this as the perfect opening to strike. At this point, the operation felt less like a smuggling case and more like a battle against a disciplined enemy with deep pockets and global support. Every move the sub made lined up with careful planning, and every escort boat played its role like a soldier protecting a valuable asset. The trap was now fully set. As the Hamilton pushed into final position and the intercept team stood ready, the mission shifted from silent tracking to a chaotic, high-speed takedown. The takedown: precision chaos at sea. The moment command approved Phase 2, the USCGC Hamilton acted without hesitation. The ship sent out a deep, pulsing acoustic warning that rolled across the water like a heavy shockwave. The sound struck the escort boats first, shaking their hulls and throwing their pilots off balance. It was a clear message that the chase was over and the fight had begun. At that same moment, the Hamilton launched a series of magnesium flares into the air. The flares burst open with intense white light that washed across the entire Gulf. What had been complete darkness a moment earlier suddenly looked like midday. The escort boats were exposed with nowhere to hide. The pilots panicked at the blinding light and the shockwave behind them. They turned hard and sped away toward the open horizon, leaving the sub alone and unprotected. With the decoys scattered, RHIB Team 1 kicked into full speed. Their small, fast boat cut through the tall waves as they aimed straight for the surfacing sub. Night vision goggles helped them see through the sea spray and shifting water as the target rose higher with each second, showing the slick curve of its narrow hull. The team knew they had only a small window, as if the sub tried to dive again. The mission could fail in an instant. As soon as the RIIB reached the sub, the operators made their move. They jumped onto the wet, slippery hull without hesitation, with each man locking himself in place using magnetic clamps that stuck firmly to the carbon fiber exterior. Once stable, they brought out their thermal cutting tools and started slicing into the sealed hatch. The heat from the cutters hissed as it met the cold metal. Every spark felt like a countdown, and everyone expected a trap. Many cartel vessels were built with self-destruct systems that could blow the sub apart to hide evidence. The tension rose even higher when the hatch finally cracked open with a loud burst of pressurized air. The operators froze for a split second, ready for anything. But the explosion they feared never happened. Instead, the interior stayed silent. When the team pushed the hatch open, they found the crew inside frozen in shock. The bright lights and sudden breach had taken all the fight out of them. None of them reached for weapons or tried to resist. The operators secured each crew member quickly and safely. Not a single shot was fired, and not one person was harmed. With the cartel crew restrained, the next task was to stabilize the sub itself. If the cartel crew had managed to trigger a scuttling system or open the ballast valves, the vessel could have sunk within minutes, taking all evidence and cargo to the bottom of the ocean. The operators worked fast to secure the controls, shut down the systems, and attach tow lines. By the time the Hamilton pulled the sub into a steady tow, the mission was a clear success. The vessel was captured intact, the crew was in custody, and the ocean was calm again. But the real story had only begun. When the sub arrived in Mobile, Alabama, for a full forensic examination, the investigators discovered something far more shocking than anyone expected. Inside the beast, a masterpiece of engineering. The sub arrived at the forensic dock in Mobile, Alabama before sunrise, and Navy engineers wasted no time. Heavy cranes lifted the captured vessel out of the water and placed it onto a dry cradle. The moment the hull touched the support beams, the engineers fell silent. What they saw did not match anything they expected from a cartel-made craft. The entire hull was built from carbon fiber reinforced polymer, which is a material usually found in advanced military programs. The surface looked smooth and seamless, with no visible welds or rough points. It was as if the body had been cast in one single piece. For a moment, the engineering team stood around it like they were studying a strange machine from another country's navy. The matte gray coating over the hull raised even more questions. Tests confirmed it was radar-absorbent paint, the same type used on stealth aircraft and high-end special operations vessels. This was not something that belonged on a smuggling sub. Someone had given this craft the ability to blend into the darkness and hide from shore-based radar systems. When the engineers opened the interior panels, the surprises kept coming. The inside was tight, cramped, and built for function, not comfort. But the power system caught everyone's attention. Racks of lithium-ion batteries lined the walls, and the thick cables linked them to a modified Chinese generator that had been rebuilt with newer parts. This combination gave the sub a level of endurance that stunned the team. Once they ran the numbers, they realized the vessel could stay underwater for nearly 70 hours without surfacing. That kind of silent endurance far exceeded what most cartels had ever managed. It meant the sub could slip under the waves, pass beneath patrol zones, and travel long distances without giving off heat, light, or noise that could expose its position. Beneath the deck plates, investigators found what they expected but still could not ignore. Inside the hidden cargo chamber, they uncovered 2,260 pounds of methamphetamine and liquid cocaine precursor. The street value reached above $400 million. It was a staggering amount, but the drugs were not the most important discovery on board. Bolted directly to the command console was a small armored box. It had a dark outer shell, reinforced edges, and an access port that had been welded shut. When the engineers looked closer, they realized what it was. This was a digital black box, a type of data recorder found more often in aircraft than in underwater smuggling vessels. The presence of this device told the investigators something critical. This sub was not meant to be lost at sea. It was never meant to be a single-use craft. It was built to return to its makers, refuel, rearm, and run a new mission. It was part of a larger system, not a disposable tool. The physical hardware alone was enough to raise alarms, but the real threat waited inside the encrypted files stored within that black box. And once the technicians cracked those files open, they would discover a danger far greater than a single illegal shipment. The Black Box Revelation and the Model N6. Inside a sealed lab in Mobile, the black box finally gave up its secrets. The encryption fought back for hours, but once the technicians cracked it open, a flood of data poured across the screens. GPS logs, wiring diagrams, sensor outputs, and full 3D blueprints appeared line after line. The room filled with quiet shock as the team realized they were not looking at the records of a simple smuggling craft. They were studying the internal files of something far more advanced. The first major revelation came from the identification tag buried deep inside the blueprints. The vessel was labeled as a Model N6. It was not a random one-off build or a custom job, but a standardized unit. Every part was listed with serial numbers, part names, and manufacturing notes. The Model N6 featured gyroscopic stabilizers for balance and semi-autonomous depth control systems that allowed the sub to hold a steady underwater position with almost no manual input. This was technology that pushed the vessel far beyond the usual level of cartel engineering. Next came the GPS logs. The technicians traced every movement the sub had taken before the interception. The path curved back toward the northern coast of Venezuela. The logs revealed not one location, but 12. They were hidden production zones spread along remote stretches of coastline, rivers, and mangrove-covered inlets. Each place showed long periods of stationary time, meaning the sub had been serviced, tested, or possibly assembled there. The engineers realized they were looking at a full production network, not a single workshop. Then the watermark on the blueprints raised even more questions. In the bottom corner of every 3D model sat the name Oceanica Systems SA. A quick search showed it was a company registered in Malta with no public employees, no physical office, and no known operations. Yet analysts found that the company handled large cash flows. Money moved in and out of it with a speed and volume that did not match a dormant shell company. When the financial logs inside the black box were opened, the story became even clearer. Funding for the Model N6 came from a maze of cryptocurrency wallets and offshore Caribbean bank accounts. Payments were spread out through dozens of small transfers, making the money trail look clean from a distance. But the pattern was clear to those trained to read it. Someone was building these submarines with a hybrid financial system that mixed criminal funds with offshore legal structures. Nothing about this looked cheap or improvised. The data showed the existence of an industrial production line capable of turning out high-tech naval vessels in batches. This meant trained engineers were involved. It meant access to advanced materials and supply chains that stretched across continents. The cartel had risen far beyond a typical smuggling group and was operating like a small country with its own covert shipbuilding arm. As analysts went through the information, the room grew tense. They understood what the files were showing them. The captured sub was not an isolated project. It was part of a larger set of a fleet, a hidden naval force growing beneath the radar. The United States had not caught a single smuggling boat. It had stumbled onto a phantom navy. The Shadow Fleet and the Ghost Contacts. The deeper the analysts dug into the data, the colder the room felt. The files showed that the Model N6 belonged to a full line of identical stealth submarines already mapped out, financed, and quietly deployed. The numbers were shocking. At least 12 sister vessels were in some stage of construction or already moving through the ocean, with no one aware of their presence. The team stared at the projection on the wall as 12 small red dots blinked like silent warnings. Each sub carried a frightening level of power. The Model N6 could travel up to 600 nautical miles without surfacing. It could hold a 3-ton payload, which meant it could move far more than drugs. It had the capacity to carry missiles, advanced surveillance devices, or even weapons the analysts did not want to name out loud. This was not a smuggler's toy. It was a battlefield machine designed to complete long missions below the radar. When the technicians examined the electronics inside the recovered sub, they found parts that came from Shenzhen. The chips, sensors, and wiring carried the signatures of manufacturers known for dual-use technology. Someone had bridged two worlds. Cartel money met foreign hardware, and the result was a submarine that behaved like a classified military prototype. The global supply chain behind it looked like a spider web that stretched across continents. Once the analysts knew what to look for, previous radar logs started to make sense. A review of the last 6 months revealed 3 strange blips that Coast Guard operators had ignored. These blips appeared for a few seconds, vanished, then reappeared miles away before dissolving again. At the time, They were dismissed as sensor noise. Now the truth hit hard. Those blips matched the movement profile of an N6 submarine. 3 of the vessels had already passed through monitored waters, and no one knew until now. That was when the weight of the situation settled in. This was no longer a smuggling problem. It was a hybrid warfare threat. The Shadow Fleet could move drugs, but it could also deliver a chemical agent to a port city, drop surveillance nodes along shipping lanes, or transport a small strike team straight to a coastline without warning. The line between crime and national security had blurred, and the cartel had built a tool that could influence both. For years, the Coast Guard treated cartel subs as crude homemade machines. That belief died in that briefing room. The cartel had created a private submarine force with capabilities that matched the early stages of an actual navy. Traditional patrol boats, radar sweeps, and airborne spotters were no longer enough. The Shadow Fleet had turned the sea into a dark maze where the enemy could hide in plain sight. This discovery forced the entire intelligence community to rethink its strategy, and the Gulf of Mexico shifted into a new role as a high-tech arena where stealth, sensors, and speed would decide the future of maritime security. A new arms race beneath the waves. Inside the Pentagon, alarms rang louder than anyone outside the building realized. The files from the Model N6 changed everything. Overnight, the Gulf of Mexico was quietly reclassified as a high-threat theater. That label was usually reserved for hostile nations with advanced weapons, not criminal groups. Yet the cartel had crossed that line. Their submarines were now close to matching the United States in one specific domain: underwater stealth. The decision showed how seriously the threat was taken at the highest levels. The Navy responded with a program that had been sitting on the shelf for years. It was called Project Subnet. It focused on building an AI-driven sonar grid that spread across key parts of the Gulf. Traditional sonar could not detect carbon fiber hulls because these hulls absorbed sound instead of bouncing it back. The answer was to track the tiny acoustic fingerprints produced by the N6's engines, pumps, and stabilizers. The system learned from every ping and every vibration, teaching itself to notice patterns humans would miss. It became a silent net that watched the underwater world without ever revealing its presence. This shift marked a turning point. Naval power was no longer measured by how many destroyers or carriers a nation had floating on the surface. The real battle moved into the deep. Algorithms are to replace patrol routes and sensors replace searchlights. The ocean was to become a chessboard where each side would try to outsmart the other with math, code, and hidden machines. The old rules of engagement did not apply anymore. Intelligence officers warned that time is not on our side. If 12 of these submarines existed already, then more were coming. Technology never stays in one place, and what a cartel built today, a militant group or extremist cell could build tomorrow. Once the blueprints leak into the darker parts of the world, every coastline would face the same fear. A new global threat would rise from factories, garages, and off-the-books workshops that operated far from any government's control. The line that separates criminals from enemy combatants has faded away, and the world has entered a strange new era where wealth from illegal trades could fund technology capable of challenging nations. It was a shadow arms race that grew quietly and moved through networks of front companies, offshore accounts, and encrypted channels. Every new vessel built in secret placed more pressure on naval defenses that were designed for an older age. The captured $400 million submarine was a major victory, but inside the operations rooms, no one celebrated for long. The officers understood the real picture. This was only the first round of a long fight. The ocean was too wide, and the Shadow Fleet had already proven it could slip past some of the best sensors in the world. The question that hung over the room was simple and heavy. If the United States barely caught this one, then what else was already out there? What other silent shapes were cutting through the dark water, unseen and headed straight for American shores at this very moment? Thank you for staying with us to the end. Please subscribe to the channel for interesting videos like this.